My name's David, and I need to talk about something that happened last summer. It's been eating me alive ever since. My son, Jamie, and I were on a trip. I thought it would be a great way to spend some quality time together, just the two of us. I'd been meaning to take him camping for a while, and after the divorce, it felt like the right moment. Something about being out in nature, away from the noise of life, seemed like it could be healing for both of us. We found this cabin for rent online, a small place tucked away in the mountains. It wasn't fancy, but it looked quiet. It was perfect for what I had in mind: fishing, hiking, maybe sitting by the fire telling stories. When we arrived, it was everything I expected: isolated, quiet, surrounded by thick woods. Jamie was excited, and for the first time in a while, I saw a real smile on his face. That first night, though, things felt off. Nothing too alarming at first, just strange. While we were unpacking, I noticed that one of the windows in the cabin wouldn't lock. I didn't think much of it. I figured the place was old and just needed some maintenance. But that night, after Jamie went to bed, I started hearing noises. At first, I thought it was just the wind. The trees swayed heavily, their branches scraping against the cabin's roof and walls. But then I heard something else, like footsteps, crunching leaves just outside the cabin. I froze, listening, convinced it was some kind of animal. But the footsteps, they were slow, deliberate. I grabbed a flashlight and went outside to check, but when I stepped onto the porch, there was nothing. The woods were silent. Too silent. I went back inside, locked the door, and sat by the window for a while, just watching. Jamie was fast asleep in the other room, so I tried not to let it bother me too much. It was probably just my mind playing tricks. The next day, we went down to the lake. Jamie wanted to fish, and for a while, things felt normal again. But when we got back to the cabin, something was wrong. The door was slightly ajar. I know I locked it before we left. I asked Jamie if he'd gone back for something, but he shook his head. I searched the cabin, every room, every closet, but nothing was missing. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been inside. That night, it got worse. I put Jamie to bed early because he seemed tired from the hike, and I stayed up reading in the living room. Around midnight, I heard a sound. It wasn't footsteps this time, but more like someone was moving around just outside the cabin, dragging something through the dirt. I got up and went to the window, peering into the darkness with my flashlight. That's when I saw it, movement in the trees. A figure, barely visible, standing just at the tree line. Watching. I shouted into the dark, "Who's there?" but there was no answer. The figure just stood there, completely still. I kept the flashlight trained on the spot, but after a few moments, it disappeared behind the trees. My heart was pounding in my chest, but I didn't want to wake Jamie. I told myself it had to be a local or some kind of prankster. But what happened next? I can barely bring myself to talk about it. Later that night, I woke to Jamie calling my name from his room. His voice was shaky, panicked. I rushed in and found him standing by the window, looking out into the darkness. "Dad, there's someone out there," he whispered. I looked out the window, but I didn't see anything at first. Still, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I could feel that same eerie presence, like we were being watched. I told Jamie to stay in his room while I checked things out. But as I moved toward the door, we heard it, a loud thud on the front porch, like something heavy being dropped. I grabbed a fireplace poker, the only weapon I could find, and inched toward the front door. When I opened it, I wasn't prepared for what I saw. There was a small, crudely made doll, some kind of rag figure, sitting right on the doorstep. It looked like it had been left there on purpose, and attached to it was a note written in sloppy, jagged handwriting. It simply said, "He's mine." Panic surged through me. I rushed back inside to Jamie, but he was gone. His room was empty, the window wide open. I screamed his name, but there was no answer. I ran outside, flashlight in hand, scanning the woods, but I couldn't see a thing. I could hear footsteps, though. Multiple footsteps. Jamie's voice, faint, calling for help. I ran toward the sound, heart racing, branches cutting into my skin as I pushed through the trees. I could hear him, but he was moving deeper into the woods, his voice fading. I kept calling out, but it was like he was being dragged away, further and further. Eventually, I saw them, two figures, dressed in dark clothing, pulling Jamie into the trees. One of them had their hand over his mouth to keep him from screaming. I ran faster, shouting, threatening, but they were too far ahead. My legs burned, my lungs felt like they were on fire, but I wasn't stopping. I couldn't stop. Then, just like that, they disappeared into the darkness. No matter how fast I ran, I couldn't catch up. I searched for hours, until I couldn't run anymore. My voice was hoarse from screaming his name. I eventually collapsed on the forest floor, gasping for breath, my mind racing. The police arrived hours later, after I made it to a nearby road and flagged down a passing car. They combed the woods, but there was no sign of Jamie. No footprints, no clues, nothing. They told me it was likely a kidnapping, that someone must have been watching us the whole time. But I know it was more than that. Whoever, whatever, took my son had been planning this. From the moment we arrived, they had been waiting, watching, making sure I couldn't protect him when it mattered most. It's been a year since that night, and I still hear his voice sometimes, calling for me in my dreams. But I couldn't save him. I don't know if I'll ever forgive myself for that.